What the hell did you do to my things? I'm teaching you a lesson about priorities, Phoenix. Those were my college certificates, my portfolio, everything I've worked for. And now maybe you'll focus on what really matters instead of chasing pipe dreams. You burned 5 years of my life because I went to a job interview. When I got back from a job interview, my dad had tossed all my belongings into the fireplace. Hi, I'm Phoenix. Today, I'm going to tell you my story, but before I continue, please like, share, and subscribe to hear more stories like this. You know that moment when you realize the person who's supposed to support you most is actually your biggest obstacle? That revelation hit me like a sledgehammer when I was 24 and finally ready to start my career as a graphic designer. I'd been living at home with my dad, Rick, since graduating college 2 years earlier. The plan was simple: save money while I built up my portfolio and found a good entry-level position in my field. What I didn't realize was that my dad had completely different plans for my future, and he was willing to go to extreme lengths to enforce them. Dad owned a small auto repair shop that had been in our family for 3 generations. His father had run it, he'd taken it over, and in his mind, I was supposed to be next in line. The fact that I had zero interest in cars and had spent 4 years studying graphic design was irrelevant to him. Art school was fine for exploring your creativity, he'd say whenever the subject came up. But now it's time to get serious about real work. The shop needs someone young who can modernize things. Dad, I appreciate what you've built, but graphic design is real work. It's what I'm passionate about and what I'm good at. Passion doesn't pay the bills, son. The shop is a guaranteed income for life. This art stuff is a gamble. I'd been having this same conversation with Dad for 2 years, and it was getting more heated each time. He couldn't understand why I'd want to waste my college education instead of taking over a profitable business. I couldn't understand why he couldn't see that forcing me into a career I hated would be a disaster for everyone involved. My mom had passed away when I was 16, and since then, it had been just Dad and me. I think her death had made him more protective and controlling, like he was afraid of losing me too if I ventured too far from his world. Your mother always supported my decisions about the family business, he'd remind me whenever I pushed back. She understood the importance of tradition and stability, but Mom had also been the one who encouraged my artistic interests, who drove me to art classes as a kid, who celebrated every drawing I brought home from school. Dad seemed to have conveniently forgotten that part of her legacy. The tension reached a breaking point when I finally landed an interview at Morrison Creative, a mid-sized design firm downtown. It was exactly the kind of opportunity I'd been working toward, a junior designer position with room for growth, working on projects for local businesses and nonprofits. When I told Dad about the interview, his reaction was explosive. Are you kidding me, Phoenix? You're going to waste time interviewing for some dead-end job when you could be learning to run a real business? It's not dead-end, Dad. It's the start of my career. Your career is here, in the shop your grandfather built with his bare hands. That's your career, not mine. I never asked to inherit a business I don't want. Well, maybe it's time you figured out what you do want, and maybe it's time I stopped enabling this fantasy of yours. I should have paid more attention to that last comment, but I was too focused on preparing for my interview to worry about Dad's threats. I'd heard them all before. The morning of the interview, I laid out my best suit, gathered my portfolio of design work, and made sure I had copies of all my certificates and references organized in a professional folder. This interview represented everything I'd been working toward, and I wanted to be perfectly prepared. Where are you going dressed like that? Dad asked when he saw me heading for the door. My interview, remember? Morrison Creative at 10 o'clock. His face darkened. I thought you'd come to your senses about that. Dad, we've been over this. I'm 24 years old. I need to start my career. Your career is here, Phoenix. The sooner you accept that, the better off we'll both be. I left without responding, not wanting to get into another argument before the most important interview of my life. The interview went incredibly well. Sarah Morrison, the creative director, was impressed with my portfolio and seemed genuinely excited about the possibility of having me join their team. We talked for over an hour about design trends, potential projects, and my vision for my career. I have to say, Phoenix, your work is exactly what we're looking for, Sarah said as we wrapped up. You have a great eye for color and composition, and your branding concepts are really innovative. Thank you so much. This is exactly the kind of environment I've been hoping to work in. I'll need to discuss it with my partner, but I'm optimistic. Can I call you tomorrow with our decision? I left Morrison Creative feeling like I was walking on air. For the first time in 2 years, I had a real prospect for starting my actual career instead of just existing in limbo at home. I was so excited that I stopped at a coffee shop to call my best friend Marcus and share the good news. Dude, that's awesome, Marcus said when I told him how well the interview had gone. It sounds like you're basically hired. I don't want to jinx it, but yeah, it felt really positive. Sarah seemed to really connect with my design aesthetic. Your dad must be proud that all your hard work is paying off. I laughed bitterly. Actually, Dad's still hoping this whole career thing is just a phase I'll grow out of. Seriously, Phoenix, you're incredibly talented. Any parent would be thrilled to have a kid pursuing their passion successfully. Try telling that to someone who thinks the only real job involves getting your hands dirty. We talked for another 20 minutes about the interview details and what the job might mean for my future. By the time I hung up, I was even more excited about the possibility of finally starting my professional life. I drove home with my portfolio on the passenger seat, already imagining how I'd celebrate when Sarah called tomorrow with good news. Maybe I'd finally be able to move out of Dad's house and into my own place. Maybe I could start dating again without feeling like I was still a kid living with his parent. When I pulled into our driveway, I noticed smoke coming from our backyard. Dad sometimes burned yard waste in our fire pit, so I didn't think much of it at first. But when I walked through the house to the back door, I smelled something that wasn't wood smoke. It was paper burning and plastic, and something chemical that made my nose sting. I opened the back door and saw a sight that will be burned into my memory forever. Dad was standing next to our large outdoor fireplace, feeding what looked like papers and other items into the flames. As I got closer, I realized with growing horror what he was burning: my college diplomas, my design certificates, my backup portfolio materials, my reference letters, my computer, my graphics tablet, even my desk lamp. Everything related to my design career was either already in the flames or piled up waiting to be burned. What the hell did you do to my things? Dad turned to face me without a trace of remorse on his face. I'm teaching you a lesson about priorities, Phoenix. Those were my college certificates, my portfolio, everything I've worked for. And now maybe you'll focus on what really matters instead of chasing pipe dreams. I stared at the fire, watching 5 years of my academic and professional life turn to ash. You burned 5 years of my life because I went to a job interview? I burned a bunch of papers that were keeping you from accepting reality. The sooner you stop playing artist and start learning the family business, the happier we'll both be. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't process the magnitude of what Dad had done. Not only had he destroyed irreplaceable documents, but he'd violated my trust in the most fundamental way possible. You're insane, I finally managed. Those certificates cost thousands of dollars to earn. The portfolio took me months to put together. Money and time you could have spent learning something useful. Consider this a wake-up call. A wake-up call? Dad, what happens when Sarah Morrison calls tomorrow and wants to hire me? What am I supposed to tell her? Sorry, my dad burned all my credentials because he doesn't approve of my career choice. For the first time, Dad looked slightly uncertain. If this job was real, you wouldn't need a bunch of fancy papers to prove yourself. That's not how the professional world works. Those certificates prove I have the education and skills they're looking for. The portfolio shows examples of my actual work. You can't just walk into a design firm and claim you're qualified. But Dad had already moved past uncertainty back to stubborn determination. Then maybe this isn't the right field for you after all. That night I called Marcus in complete despair. He burned everything, man. My diploma, my certificates, my backup portfolio materials, even my computer equipment. Phoenix, that's destruction of property. That's criminal. It's my dad, Marcus. I can't call the police on my own father. Why not? What he did was psychotic. Normal parents don't burn their children's belongings because they disagree with their career choices. Marcus was right, but I was still too shocked and hurt to think clearly about legal consequences. All I could think about was how I was going to explain to Sarah Morrison that I couldn't provide any of the documentation she'd need to officially hire me. The next day, Sarah called as promised. Phoenix, I have great news. We'd love to offer you the position. The starting salary is $35,000 with full benefits and opportunity for advancement. When can you start? My heart broke as I realized I was going to have to turn down my dream job. Sarah, I'm incredibly honored by the offer, but I need to ask about something. There was a fire at my house yesterday, and I lost all my original certificates and portfolio materials. Would copies be acceptable for your HR requirements? Oh, no, I'm so sorry to hear about the fire. Of course, copies would be fine. We just need them for our records. Can you get replacement documents from your college? Absolutely. It might take a few weeks, but I can get everything you need. No problem at all. We're in no rush. Good talent is worth waiting for. After I hung up, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time since discovering Dad's betrayal. Maybe I could still salvage this opportunity. But getting replacement documents proved more complicated than I'd expected. Official transcripts and diploma copies took weeks to process and cost hundreds of dollars I didn't have. My professors were sympathetic when I explained what had happened, but recreating portfolio pieces from scratch would take months. Meanwhile, Dad acted like nothing had happened. He expected me to show up at the shop each morning, ready to learn about oil changes and brake repairs. See how much simpler life is when you stop fighting what's meant to be? He said, when I reluctantly agreed to work at the shop while waiting for my replacement documents. This isn't meant to be, Dad. This is you forcing me into something I never wanted. You'll understand someday. Family businesses are about legacy, about building something that lasts. What legacy? Making your son miserable so you can feel like you're in control? That's when I made the decision that changed everything. I called my Uncle Tony, Dad's younger brother, who'd moved to Seattle years earlier to escape the family pressure to work in the automotive industry. Tony, I need help. Dad burned all my design credentials because I went to a job interview. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. Phoenix, please tell me you're exaggerating. I wish I was. He destroyed everything, my diplomas, my certificates, my portfolio, my computer equipment, everything I need to start my career. That's not discipline, nephew. That's abuse, mental and financial abuse. Tony had always been the black sheep of the family for choosing a career in software development over the family business. Now I understood why he'd moved across the country. He'd been dealing with similar pressure from Dad and Grandpa years earlier. Look, I've got a spare room and connections in the design industry here in Seattle. Pack whatever Dad hasn't burned and get on a plane. It's time you learned that family is supposed to support your dreams, not destroy them. The decision to leave felt both terrifying and liberating. I was 24 years old and had never lived more than 20 miles from the house where I grew up. But staying meant accepting Dad's version of my future, and I wasn't willing to do that. I bought a plane ticket with money from my savings account and started packing what remained of my belongings. Dad didn't know about my plan until he saw the suitcases. Where do you think you're going? Seattle. Uncle Tony offered me a place to stay while I rebuild my career. Tony, Dad's face flushed with anger, you're running away to live with my loser brother who couldn't hack it in the real world? Tony built a successful career doing something he loved. That doesn't make him a loser, it makes him smart. If you leave, don't expect to come crawling back when this fantasy falls apart. I won't be coming back, Dad. Not unless you're ready to apologize for what you did and respect my choices as an adult. You'll regret this, Phoenix. Mark my words. But I didn't regret it. Moving to Seattle was the best decision I ever made. Tony helped me get connected with the design community there, and within 3 months, I'd landed a position at a tech startup that specialized in app design. My new employers were impressed with my creativity and work ethic, even without the formal documentation Dad had destroyed. More importantly, I was finally living my own life instead of the life someone else had planned for me. Meanwhile, the consequences of Dad's actions began catching up with him in ways he hadn't anticipated. When word spread through our small hometown about what Dad had done, the reaction was overwhelmingly negative. Other business owners were appalled that he'd sabotaged his own son's career prospects. Customers started questioning whether they wanted to support someone who would destroy his child's future out of spite. "Rick, what you did to Phoenix was wrong," I heard from our neighbor, Mrs. Peterson, when Dad related the conversation to Tony. "That boy worked hard in college, and you had no right to burn his accomplishments." Similar conversations happened throughout town. Dad had expected people to support his tough love approach, but instead, he found himself increasingly isolated in his opinions. The family business began suffering as well. Dad had been counting on me to help modernize operations and bring in younger customers. Without me there, and without any other family members interested in the automotive industry, Dad realized he was facing the prospect of the business dying with him. His attempts to hire and train non-family employees were disasters. Without the emotional investment that comes with family legacy, workers saw the job as just another low-paying position in a declining industry. Within a year, Dad was struggling to keep the business afloat. The shop that had supported 3 generations of our family was failing because he'd driven away the 4th generation through his controlling behavior. Tony kept me updated on Dad's situation through conversations with other family members. "Your Aunt Linda says the shop is barely breaking even," Tony told me during one of our regular phone calls. "Rick's having trouble finding good mechanics, and half his regular customers have started going to the chain stores." "I feel bad for him, but he made his choice," I replied. "He chose to destroy my future rather than accept that I had different goals." "Don't feel too bad. He's learning that you can't control other people's lives through fear and manipulation." 2 years later, Dad finally swallowed his pride and called me. "Phoenix, I owe you an apology. Go on. What I did was wrong. I was so afraid of losing you like I lost your mother that I tried to force you to stay. But I ended up pushing you away anyway." "Dad, you didn't just push me away. You tried to destroy my entire future because it didn't match your vision. That's not protection, that's abuse." "I know that now. I've been going to counseling, trying to understand why I thought what I did was acceptable. It was a start, but it wasn't enough to undo the damage he'd caused. I'm glad you're getting help, Dad. But I'm not ready to have you back in my life yet. Maybe someday, but not yet." "I understand. I just want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished, even though I tried to prevent it." That conversation was 3 years ago. Dad and I talk occasionally now, but our relationship will never be what it could have been. The trust he destroyed when he burned my belongings can't be fully rebuilt, no matter how many apologies he offers. The family business eventually closed. Dad sold the property to a developer who turned it into a coffee shop. The 3 generation legacy he'd been so desperate to preserve ended because he couldn't accept that legacies evolve and change. What would you do if someone you loved tried to destroy your dreams because they didn't align with their vision for your life?